Time is discontinuous in nature, and there are different ways to explain this discontinuity. One way is through the concept of in-out time. The one moment that exists functions like a strobe, providing the perception of change that allows for the experience of multiple moments. The in-out phrase in the term in-out time is short for in perception, out of perception. Change is merely an expression of discontinuity. Every new position in time is a new perception of a different universe. The reason time doesn't seem discontinuous is because it changes at a rate that goes above and beyond your nervous system's capacity for noticing and comprehending the rate of change. This rate of change is the rate the physical universe your brain exists in changes. So how your brain perceives it doesn't change the rate. It changes your subjective perception of the rate. This perpetually incomprehensible rate is Planck time to Planck time. Without going too much into Planck time in the brain, which is explained more thoroughly in other videos, Planck time is a natural unit of measurement created by the physical properties that compose your physical reality experience, such as gravity, the speed of light, etc. And again, how fast or slow the brain works is irrelevant to this change rate. Planck time is how long it takes your consciousness to self-reflect upon its existence and thus build a perception of a physical universe and body. Planck state phenomena are the various expressions of materiality, such as an object or a universe, that exist for a Planck time's worth of experience and then seemingly transform into another version of itself, defining another position in time. Also, with regard to the overall concept of in-out time, consciousness using a Planck time to go from in to out, or from in to out and back to in, is the same concept functionally, because only the in portion is what's being measured as having changed. The fact that things can seem to not change much from moment to moment generates the continuity illusion that the same you is observing the same things. This building process is what is meant by in-out time. It is what allows for the transformation quality of linear time by having one perception of a Planck state universe and then another in succession. But again, this linear experience is being generated within a non-linear volume of time. You perceive a universe and then you don't. Then you perceive a different universe because there is only one spot for you to experience a universe. The way you know the out-of-perception portion of in-out time exists is that any change occurs at all. Think about it. If you have an object in time and select two positions of it, both with unique time variables, to observe both, you perceive one as one state of time and there must be some mechanism allowing you to observe the next, or else you'd just be fixated upon one time variable. The out-of-perception portion of in-out time is that mechanism. Even if you could have a higher dimensional perspective that could see both objects with different time variables, it would require a different system of labeling time because seeing them simultaneously would no longer make them hold different time variables. Long story short, that's not the human perspective and is irrelevant to what's being discussed now. Now let's dive into the process that is in-out time and where the universe gets very tricky and very paradoxical. First, a simplistic explanation is provided. Afterwards, we'll dive deeper. Consciousness projects a state of itself as an observable universe that is infinitely big. The infinitely big claim will be addressed in a minute, as well as the concept of projection. This projected state, relative to the human experience, is expressed as a unique Planck state universe. It's a physicalized symbol of the non-physical consciousness. The infinite bigness of the structure being called the universe causes a kind of collapse into chaos as a natural stabilizing reaction. This collapse into chaos translates into the human perspective as nothing. The perception of change happens when consciousness realizes this nothing quality. Upon that realization, a miracle occurs. Consciousness is now in a new state. It's in a state different enough for a new universe to be projected within itself and thus symbolize that new state of consciousness. The in aspect of in-out time is the perception of structure, and the out aspect is a perception of no structure. It's not literally no structure, it's just being called that in comparison to its opposite. It's like having a right foot versus having no right foot, not a right foot and a left foot. This specifically explains the human perspective. All possible Planck state universes already exist, but the human perspective only allows for the physical perception of one at a time. In-out time, as described here, is actually even more complex if you define it from a bigger observation context than the human perspective. Now, to further clarify this explanation, this collapsing projection phenomenon is not the Big Bang, the Hartle-Hawking state, or a universal wave function collapse. In-out time is specifically talking about how the phenomena experienced within time is able to be experienced. It's not directly addressing how matter and energy behave. It's directly addressing how its behavior is capable of being observed. Another thing to clarify is that what's meant by the universe being infinitely big is that regardless of what the universe looks like, and even if there are limits to physical matter, dark matter, energy, or any substance at all, the outside of that limitation border would still be contained within the definition of a Planck state universe in consciousness. So in other words, if the physical universe is only a centillion miles long, whatever exists beyond it is being defined as an unlabeled attachment and aspect of the physical universe. The concept of a Planck state universe being projected and then collapsing into chaos is an analogous phrase. It's not literally being projected then collapsing. A structure called the universe is being perceived within consciousness, and then consciousness changes its viewpoint in a way that renders the structure unintelligible. Another way to say this is that seeing the universe begets not seeing the universe because consciousness is using that seeing resource to see the universe. As it uses up that seeing resource, it simultaneously uses up the opposite resource of not seeing, thus completing the process of observing a momentary state of itself as time experience. Some of the language used to describe this phenomenon isn't literal and has a space-time flavor because it's a timeless process being explained in terms relevant to the human experience. The concept of a process being timeless itself is a paradox, but it does make sense because we're talking about a process to create the perception of time itself. So this process of the universe being projected and then collapsing paradoxically does take time, which makes it a process, but it also does not take time, which makes it timeless. In this sense, it literally takes time to make time, Or even more aptly stated, it takes time to make timelessness, just as it takes timelessness to make time. One concept can't exist without the other, because it's all one experience of consciousness. To clarify one final thing, whether you say consciousness is self-reflecting over and over again, or that it is self-reflecting once, and in that one self-reflection is generating in-out time, is irrelevant, because both submodels are essentially saying the same thing with different terms. Also, self-awareness and self-reflection are two completely different terms. Self-awareness is being aware that you exist. Self-reflection is the act of observing what you exist as. Consciousness is always self-aware because that's literally what it is. We're not talking about intelligence or holding memory, and we're not talking about what consciousness is aware of. We're talking about the quality of being aware at all. This is a big topic that will be explained in depth in another video. So with that said, the out of perception quality doesn't mean out of self-awareness. It means out of the state of self-awareness generating an observation of the in-perception portion. The out aspect of in-out time isn't building time any more so than if consciousness is or isn't self-reflecting upon itself. Consciousness looking in itself and then seemingly not every Planck time isn't different in effect than consciousness just being self-reflective and observing a polarized portion of its structured self called unstructured. What's most important to remember is that all of this is a technical explanation as to how you experience yourself. It is all a marvelous orchestration, as automatic and natural as breathing in and breathing out, serving as a stage for the celestial epic that is the human experience. You are the universe.